Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to be talking through my top 24 wide receiver tiers for Dynasty Fantasy Football here in June of 2022. So we're going to be diving into basically my wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2s for, again, this year's Dynasty Fantasy Football League. So that being for 12-team formats, and I base my rankings here off of half PPR. So we're looking to keep things balanced, about as even as possible. So hopefully those of you in PPR leagues can find some common ground here. And then if I was doing full PPR rankings, I'd be a bit far away from those of you who are in any standard leagues. So again, my top 24 Dynasty wide receiver rankings for this season. If you're new around here, drop down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode. We're posting redraft, Dynasty, mock drafts, fantasy leagues, all that great stuff on the channel here on SFS throughout the entire summer and throughout the year-round here. So you don't want to miss any episodes. We're putting out a lot of stuff. We just started posting Weddle content as well on a daily basis. So if you like the Weddle, go check out our YouTube Shorts or our TikToks, any of our social media accounts. You can find all that extra content there. So we're going to dive into today's video. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the tiers. All right, so for today's video, we actually only have 4 tiers. I think the wide receiver position is so deep, and there's so many great or potentially great players that it's possible to lump them up a lot more than it is for the running backs, because I think that there's significant stages of drop-off, whereas you can find a reason to like just about any receiver. So we're going to be fairly optimistic in today's video, talking through why these players have the chance to be great fantasy assets. And then obviously we'll be comparing and contrasting to an extent in today's video. Obviously, you know, not every player has the same similarities. Like you'll see some guys in tiers who maybe haven't quite reached their potential yet, but some guys are in that tier because they're on the way down, but they've still got maybe 1 or 2 great seasons left in them. So we'll dive through all that stuff in today's video. But if you guys are looking for a draft guide for this season's fantasy football or want some information for your dynasty leagues, check out sizzlefantasy.com. We've got, for just under $5 a month, you can get access to the Dynasty and Redraft draft guides. The Dynasty draft guide is going to include eventually player profiles for each of my top 300 players. So we've got about 100 of them in the site right now. And I'm trying to crank through about 5 new players per day. So if I can, I'll do more, obviously, because I love diving into those situations. But in each of those profiles, we include trade value, all of their pertinent information regarding age, experience in the league, injury history, and then we dive into situations and talk pros and cons with both their talent and skill sets, as well as, again, that team and any barriers to success that they might have in those situations. If you also want to get access to those for just a one-time thing for the entire next calendar year, if you sign up for Underdog Fantasy, it's a great app, by far the best place to do drafts for this 2022 season. If you use promo code SFS when you sign up for Underdog and deposit $10 or more, Underdog's going to double your money to play with, and you're going to get the draft guides again if you sign up in the month of June here for the entire next calendar year, which I think is pretty great stuff. So help me out. Go sign up for Underdog. We'll get you that draft guide set up, and we'll get you a ton of exclusive content. We'll be dropping articles that you'll have access to once per week for the entire year, at least 1 exclusive article per week, and a ton of content. You'll get in-season weekly lineup advice and access to myself as a resource in your fantasy leagues this season. But that was a lot of talking. Let's dive into the tiers here, not wasting more time. So essentially, the first 2 players, we're going to go in order here. So we're gonna go tier by tier and essentially break things down in a organized fashion. I do at times like to just kind of scatter it all around and make it a little bit more interesting for you guys, but if that's something you really want to see, let me know down in the comments. Of course, if you have questions and concerns, anything you want answers to for your fantasy leagues, you can put that down there as well, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But basically, we're going to go on an orderly fashion here. Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase belong in the S tier. These are the top 2 wide receivers in Dynasty Fantasy Football, and I don't think there's really any question about that. The level of elite production these guys are putting up so early in their fantasy careers, or their NFL careers in general, is completely absurd. The wide receiver position the last 5 or 6 years or so has rapidly increased the turnaround for high-level production that you can see out of players. You're talking about, going from the days where, let's think back to Davante Adams, arguably the top receiver on draft boards the last 2 seasons. I had him as my wide receiver 1 in 2020, and obviously no one had Cooper Kupp as their wide receiver 1 last year. It was Davante Adams for me heading into draft day for the 2021 season. Think about how long Davante Adams took to break out. And think about how great his situation was. He was catching passes from Aaron Rodgers on day one from 2014 forward. It took him until about 2016 to really hit as a fantasy viable lineup option, and he didn't really break out as a number one receiving threat until 2017, where he was also playing and didn't even have a 1,000-yard season because Brett Hundley was, limping his way, not because he was injured, just because he was a terrible starting quarterback, at least throwing the football wise. He was pretty athletic and could move with his legs, but you get the point that I'm saying here. It used to take wide receivers a lot longer to hit, and you're talking about two guys in Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase who had 1,400 plus yards in their rookie seasons. Each one went back-to-back in setting the receiving yardage record for a rookie wideout. That's unprecedented stuff. Jefferson's target volume is elite. This is a guy who was second in targets, 169 of them a season ago. Absolute insanity out of him. 167 targets. 29.9% of the Vikings' target share, and being number one in air yards, having a 1,600-yard season in his second NFL year. Jamar Chase, on the flip side, only had 128 targets this past season, but scored 13 TDs, was one of the most efficient players, was third in yards per target, and was the wide receiver 5 in points per game, breaking Jefferson's record he set the season prior with his 1,400-yard plus season, that being Jamar Chase in 2021 with Joe Burrow. So these guys can do absolutely absurd and ridiculous things. However, they are joined by two other players in the S tier. These are players who, if you ask me, Chase and Jefferson are the clear-cut number 1 and 2 dynasty wide receivers. I'm not going to bicker with you too much in terms of, numeric rankings, which one you put ahead of the other. They're both the utmost elite options. Personally, give me a year longer of Chase's shelf life just because he came into the NFL a year later and, didn't play college football. His last year of eligibility at LSU before he entered, opted out for the 2020 season because of COVID. Give me that extra year, I'll take Jamar Chase. But again, you really can't go wrong with either player. I am going to toss Cooper Kupp and CeeDee Lamb up in this category. Now, before you guys freak out, because I think that it's relatively unpopular to group Cooper Kupp in this category, I've done so for two reasons. I believe Cooper Kupp's best fantasy season is in the past. I do not think he'll improve or ever have a season nearly as great as the almost 2,000-yard year, 16 touchdowns, Triple Crown winner, and Super Bowl MVP that he was. I mean, the accolades were just stacked, one on top of another. I mean, this man built the mother of all Jenga towers with the amount of things that he brought to the table last year. I don't think he'll do that again. But what I do think is that in full PPR leagues, being a guy who is one of the most utilized slot receivers, which to me is very important, he's going to have the ability to just harass cornerbacks for, I would say, 5 to 6 more years. The wide receiver shelf life is far larger than that of running backs. And for slot receivers, especially guys who don't need elite levels of athleticism but win with what's upstairs, their route running ability and their finesse, I think those guys have a lot longer shelf life of high-end production. Yes, again, his production as he ages closer and closer to his 30-year-old season here, I mean, the production at a point will begin to taper off and drop off. But he's still the clear-cut number 1 in LA, despite the fact they have A-Rob, who I absolutely love. But his utilization and his role, the value he has to this team, is not going anywhere anytime soon. And in my opinion, neither is Matt Stafford. He's got 4, heck, who knows, maybe 5 seasons left on the table. It depends how long he wants to play football, honestly. But as long as the Rams want him in-house, he's producing at a level that's going to make them want to keep him. So I think that situation maintains at a high level for, again, a few seasons. You can make the argument that because of age and the lack of youth that these other 3 players have, maybe Cooper doesn't belong here. However, I think he does. CeeDee Lamb is also in this category, not because of a proven track record, because of expectations. CeeDee has not delivered on, let's face it, a lot of fantasy outlets have him ranked as a top 3 dynasty receiver. I have him just outside of that bubble. However, he is in the S tier because for me, I believe that, yes, there are 100% levels to this tiers list. And if I wanted to make this an 8-section long video, I could have done that. However, I think that in terms of the quality of options you're getting here, I think he still deserves to be referenced in this grouping. The reasoning for that is because, A, he now has the first opportunity he's had in his NFL career to see elite target volume. That is not something that he's had in Dallas before. He has not had those elite 25% target share seasons to this point in his career. He has also not been the clear-cut number one option. Those things kind of go hand in hand with one another. But when you talk about Amari Cooper being there, you've kind of got this awkward 1-2 dynamic where you don't really know who's the top guy. We expected CD to kind of take over last year, but it was still a little bit more even than maybe we would have liked. I mean, CD still took precedence and was the number one at the end of the day. However, there's more opportunity to be had now. Dak Prescott was very efficient last year. He was top 10 in yards per attempt as a passer. If you tell me CeeDee Lamb is the top guy and then the next player is a semi-raw rookie in Jalen Tolbert, who I think has talent eventually, and Michael Gallup's coming off an ACL, the team that was fourth in pass plays per game last year, I think just opened up a lot more opportunity for a guy who we loved off the bat because of the talent to begin with in the situational landing spot. I think he finally has the opportunity to hit on that upside. He's still very young, entering into year 3. The sky's the limit for what CeeDee Lamb can do. And I think, Justin Jefferson was with him in that 2020 class, but if you asked 95% of people, they did not have Justin Jefferson as their wide receiver 1. It was either Jerry Jeudy, who you'll see later, or CeeDee Lamb coming out of that 2020 draft class. And they were drafted higher than Justin Jefferson for that exact reason. So we're going to dive into the A tier now. These are players who I have slightly more concerns about. Now, when I talk about shelf life with Deebo Samuel, putting him in the A tier and not the S tier, you have to understand the context of the situation. Deebo Samuel is already old as it is for a guy who hasn't even exited his rookie contract. He is a player who is going to be 27 plus after that deal expires. He's still looking for a second contract in San Francisco, which would be ideal. You want to see Deebo Samuel stay with that team because it's with the 49ers that gives him the best opportunity to be used to his fullest potential because we've seen it happen already. Yes, if the draft would have turned out in a fashion that the Jets ended up trading the number 10 pick in a package for Deebo, I'm sure we would have all felt very comfortable with Deebo Samuel, especially because there is some ties to San Francisco lineage there, but it wouldn't have been a guarantee that he is that wide back role. It's still not even a guarantee that he plays that role in San Francisco because there's rumors that he doesn't want to be used in that fashion anymore because I think that he saw this offseason how that running back utility impacted his contract negotiations. So you're talking about a player who is, one of the most, he's a one-of-one player. His unique talent is insanely dynamic. It is unmatched by any player. You talk about a guy who is his explosiveness level, his playmaking skills as a pass catcher, and the physicality he brings. It's a recipe for disaster for defenses at every level. When I watched him as a rookie taking end-around plays and jet sweeps, I thought he reminded me of a more explosive Le'Veon Bell as a receiver. Like, that was the comp I had for Deebo Samuel as a wideout, as an NFL rookie. Again, I'm speaking raves of what I think of him as a playmaker. But where I start to kind of fall off the wagon for Deebo Samuel is you're talking about a player who is, again, an older guy on this rookie contract, has far and away the most physical and grueling play style of any other wide receiver, and that's going to take a hit on his shelf life. The reason I think Cooper Kupp can be highly effective until age 34 or 35 seasons is because he's a guy who's lining up in the slot. He's insanely smart. He'll sit down in coverage, not take an unnecessary shot. Now, the one red flag, and you can counter me with this if you're, really not liking that Cooper Kupp S tier ranking, is yes, they use him a lot as a blocker in the run game. They use him in a physical nature that way. But he is not literally throwing his body at linebackers in the A-hole, or in the A-gap is probably what I should have said there because that sounded a bit sus, is that you're just bashing and banging on Deebo, and he's a guy who has been missing games to an extent and dealing with some wear and tear injuries throughout the season. You had the groin this year, the foot in 2020. I forget, and hamstrings as well has been something he's dealt with. So I think the runway is a little bit less, and of course that wide back situational role is everything. If Deebo Samuel is an X wide receiver and strictly lines up and runs routes, he probably doesn't even belong in the A tier. He's still a wide receiver 1, a top 12 guy, but he's no longer an A tier player if he doesn't have that rushing volume. And for a guy who had 8 rushing touchdowns and got a quarter of his fantasy production in the run game last year, That's hard to sustain, man. And I just think that at the end of the day, that could wear out pretty quickly, and we could see things start to change. Stephon Diggs is the next guy that's going to go in the A tier. Now, Diggs is another player who possibly had his best season already. 2020 was a pretty great year for him. Really high catch rate, really high efficiency. Obviously, that first year of dynamic connection ability between him and Josh Allen was unmatched, and he was kind of the steal of that year's draft. Had that Week 16 whomping winner that I'll never forget for the rest of my life against the Patriots. The issue here is age. And again, is his ceiling are his best days in the past? Now, that doesn't mean he's washed up. That doesn't mean that he's not, a top 5 receiver for the 2022 season. It just means that, there is a higher ceiling, a higher level, and a bar that the guys in that first tier can reach that I don't think Diggs is necessarily capable of. And yes, he does have a 25% target share of that Bills offense in back-to-back years. That's very, very intriguing, very impressive. Again, catching passes from what I would argue to be his dream quarterback. I mean, I think their skill sets line up so perfectly. Where can you really go from here to get better for Diggs? And he's a guy who is, just an age or a year behind Davante Adams in terms of his age. It hasn't quite hit the highs that Davante Adams has had, but is certainly capable of doing so. But again, what extent do we expect him to improve, which I don't think is something that'll happen. It's just about maintaining at this point and having longevity and having a long runway of fantasy success that can keep Diggs in this A tier because the situation is fantastic. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere. I believe he's tied up until 2027 or 2028 as well. So you've got a long leash there for Diggs. Adams joins him here. Adams could potentially see some negative fall off here from moving out of the Green Bay situation where he was annually a 30% target share guy with the Packers offense. There was virtually no competition for targets, at least, to the level that he provided. And you've got a player who is probably, despite his own exclamation of, talent-wise, Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers really aren't that different. We'll see about that. They have chemistry. Derek Carr is a very good NFL quarterback, but will he be able to develop and deliver top 5 wide receiver numbers on a year-to-year basis? That's what's going to be the deal breaker here. And as Adams turns 30 years old this season, he's a guy who the clock is ticking on him. He's a guy who's had a little bit more wear and tear, nagging injuries, and he's a guy that also doesn't take very many shots. He has taken some big hits over his career. If you think back to, one time I think Danny Trevathan put him in the hospital with a helmet-to-helmet hit against Chicago. I want to say that was in like 2017 or 2018. And he's had some concussions, some hamstring issues, some ankle problems. Standard stuff. Wide receivers are going to get nicked and dinged, and Diggs has got kind of a checkered injury history, although never had a significant season ender. It's just something you start to worry about a little bit more as, his physicality degrades a little bit and he loses a step potentially in the next couple of years. But I think that he'll be fine for this season. It is a potential that, again, there is drop off there because I don't think there's no way he has a 30% target share with Waller and Renfrow in that offense. So I think we'd be optimistic to see 25% of the target share head to Adams, and the rest has to be added fuel to the fire and hope that he just, exceeds our expectations at this point. But again, you could be asking me, what are my tiers next season? And Adams could easily find himself in the B tier because I think year one, theoretically, with the age timeline that we have in front of us, should be his best season as a Raider. He should be his best self with Las Vegas in 2022. Definitely 2023 would be his peak if it's not this year. Just because when you start to get to the, your age 32 season, it's really hard to make a case for why you would start to do things at an elite level. And whereas, we'll go back to the slot argument, Hunter Renfrow is the slot for the Raiders team, whereas Tay was playing slot for the Packers. That's not going to be so much of an option, especially since they just re-signed Renfrow to an extension for 2 years. It's not that Adams isn't better than Kupp, or I keep saying Kupp because they traded routes from each other last year and they play very similarly, although Renfrow is like, a very discounted version of that player, and especially with Adams in town will not produce at that level. But It's not that Renfrow is a better player and has precedence in the slot over Adams. It's that Renfrow fits that situation and is more effective as a player there, and Adams can still dominate on the perimeter, is essentially what I was trying to get at there. So this is actually our biggest tier of today's video. We're going to toss T. Higgins up here as well. Now, I don't ever see T. Higgins leaving the A tier, but I also don't really see much of a risk for him to drop down to my B tier. Why? T. Higgins is tied to one of the best quarterbacks in NFL offenses in the league. Cincinnati is a fantastic offense to be tied to. And again, the keys to that are Joe Burrow. And he's going to be facing second-tier coverage every single week, eating it alive, being a large frame and really advantageous target option in the red zone. He can make big plays over the top. He had basically even ground with Jamar Chase for target share last year. Maybe, it swings in favor of Chase, 25-23 this season. Who knows? Or maybe they stay exactly on even ground again this year. But T. Higgins is so talented. He easily could be the top receiving option in this offense. Had they never drafted Jamar Chase, they would be just fine moving forward. And T. Higgins could, who knows, maybe be an S-tier player if he was seeing, that much more target volume per game. But their offense is so dynamic, so explosive. They have so many options to go with that create a stress and tension on defenses that it makes it really hard to key in on one player. And being a guy who's in his third season, I think his best days are still in front of him here. And as this offense continues to progress, their offensive line has improved. Burrow won't be under pressure as much. I think that T will be, if you manage your expectations and have the realistic mindset that he's going to be a low-level wide receiver one every year, I don't think you're setting yourself up to get hurt or disappointed in leagues. Next up here, I want to add Jalen Waddle to the tiers list. Now, Waddle, in terms of everyone that's on the A tier so far, is probably the most talented player. He's just not in the best situation. You look at, you could argue that maybe every single player we put up here so far is in a better situation, but Jalen Waddle, again, is probably the best player in terms of ceiling and potential. I think that, Devontae Adams doesn't have nearly the athletic profile that Waddle has, and Waddle is a dang good route runner. Not quite to Adams' extent yet, but I'm saying as a prospect, let's put it that way. As an NFL receiver prospect, Jalen Waddle probably has the most tools in athletic upside of anyone on this list. But again, when you're splitting time with Tyreek Hill in this offense, there's only so much you can do, and it's not splitting time. They're going to coexist and be on the field at the same time together, but there is only so many passes in an offense. We can be real about that and level with that, right? I mean, in Dynasty, I'm going to value the younger option, the guy who I think has the opportunity to now learn from a guy who is really freaking similar in skill set. I think Jalen Waddle will have a phenomenal NFL career as a Miami Dolphin, and I think that eventually once Tyreek Hill, who is very predicated around, athletic burst and speed, once that starts to fall off a little bit, I think the roles kind of flip, whereas this year, I think Tyreek's the number one. Maybe by 2024, if they're still together and tied in that Miami offense, I think Waddle starts to, develop himself as the clear number one. This is a guy who had a 25% target share, nearly 24.8% to be exact, in year one. Had a really good 43.8% slot snap percentage, which again is something I loved about Cooper Kupp being in the top of that category. And I think that you just got a lot to work with here. The only question marks for me are really the quarterback and then the immediate success, having to figure out how to coexist as a fantasy option without elite quarterback play, which is what Joe Burrow provides to Higgins and Jamar Chase and allows them to be S and A tier players, whereas, I'll spoil it, you're going to have Tyreek in this A tier as well. But we're not going to talk two Dolphins in a row. Let's find A.J. Brown here. Don't have him in an Eagles uniform yet, but just note he has been traded. Same with Devontae. He's in the Packers jersey still. A.J. Brown for me is, again, insanely talented. After the catch, one of the best receivers in the NFL. He is ridiculously talented. And he needs to be super efficient. This isn't a guy who has had elite volume at any stage or at any point in his NFL career. And I think that with the infrastructure of Philadelphia right now, we really can't project that forward too much. I think it's going to be much of the same. He's going to be an inconsistent fringe wide receiver one this season. If Hurts totally, falls on his face and soils the bed, maybe they move on and go elsewhere. They were rumored to be in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, so, at least maybe their front office isn't content and satisfied. I like Jalen Hurts, not as a passer, not for A.J. Brown's fantasy value, but as just, rooting for NFL players goes. But when your quarterback is 61.3% in terms of his completion percentage, which ranks outside of the top 32 NFL quarterbacks, that's a red flag. I did talk about this in an episode earlier today, is that he is actually 10th in deep ball accuracy, that being Jalen Hurts. So there is a positive here. There is potentially something sneaky to have at play. However, my question, and I still haven't done the context digging into this, but I raised this question in point as well in today's earlier episode, is how much of that was a lack of volume and a lack of sample size? How much of that number came from a lack of downfield passing attempts versus how effective was he really? You kind of get what I'm saying here. If you're throwing the ball downfield 3 to 5 times per game versus a guy who does it one shot play per game, and that one shot play, because the defense is totally not expecting it, becomes wide open, or maybe you set up a dang good play action run play, that play has a better chance of succeeding if the coverage is nowhere to be found. But in Joe Burrow's case, when you've got a guy in Jamar Chase who's third in deep targets and the defense knows they're going to be stressed vertically, they're simply just winning because they're great at that individual skill. I don't think that Jalen Hurts is great at throwing the ball deep downfield. I think it's more of a lack of volume thing. But again, I got to check my numbers and my facts and make sure that I'm actually correct with that assessment. But obviously, I'm raising those red flags and those questions and asking this stuff to you guys so you can be actively thinking about it, aware of it, all that great stuff. So if someone wants to toss in the comment section, if they have the answer for me, it's certainly welcome here. And I'm definitely, open to listening. But the last guy that goes in this A tier is going to be Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. If I can find him, he's not in a Dolphins uni. There he is. Tyreek is there's a lot of talk, the Debo role in Miami's offense, Mike McDaniel. I hope I say McDaniel every time, because I went through a phase right when he got signed where I kept calling him Mike McDonald. I don't know why, but they sound similar, I guess. Essentially here, the optimism, the upside, the hope, the fantasy upside is Debo Samuel. But they are very different players, and the reason that comparison becomes drawn, of course, is because McDaniel was on the offensive coaching staff in San Francisco, which coached Debo Samuel this past year. He has now been hired to replace Brian Flores as the head coach in Miami, making the transition between a defensive-minded head coach and an offensive-minded head coach. So, again, that's where that comparison comes from, but Tyreek is not a physical player. He is twitchy, he's explosive, he's elite athletically in space. That is where the upside comes from here. He does not want to get touched, hit, run up the A gap or B gap or the A hole, if you will, if you were watching earlier when I poorly worded my words there. You've got a guy who just can't take that level of punishment and physicality and is actually older than Debo Samuel. So despite the fact that Debo was a bit older as a rookie, he kind of fits into that Stephon Diggs age timeline there, just about a year behind Devontae Adams in terms of age progression. Adams is walking into his age 30 season. Those guys are a year behind that. So Tyreek's got a lot to offer here again. If he's catching a high dosage of volume underneath, which I expect him to be the lead option in Miami's offense this year, otherwise they wouldn't have traded the house for him. I forget what the saying is. I totally lost the train of thought there, but you gotta get him involved, and he's gonna be involved. Him and Jalen Waddle. The biggest conflict for fantasy is gonna be coexistence. The talent is there. You've got two elite playmakers, two elite athletes, very comparable to one another. I saw, I can't tell you how many comps there were between Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle coming out of Alabama for Jalen Waddle. But again, it's going to be about how many targets realistically can each player have while coexisting in the same offense. And that's going to be the big question at the end of the day. Deontay Johnson falls in the B tier for me. While I think Deontay is phenomenal, he is more youthful than a lot of the veterans who have previous fantasy success on this list. There are question marks in this offense, and those start with Kenny Pickett. And now I don't think the situation can get much worse in terms of passing accuracy than it did with Ben Roethlisberger. But the door has been kind of kicked open for him to pick another favorite target. You've got Juju out of the situation, but you bring in a better athlete in George Pickens, who could be a very good vertical field stretching X-receiver type build for this team. I think Chase Claypool's targets are more in jeopardy here, but I do think that Deontay Johnson is someone who still deserves a high level of respect, but I don't think he can be thought of as an A-tier player. If we're talking like a top 12 rankings list, yes, he probably makes it in there, barely for my Dynasty rankings, but this is a guy who gives you more week-to-week floor stability than he does upside to begin with. Now, that wasn't the case in his rookie season where he saw some downfield passing attempts. He is quite explosive. He can stretch the field. He's one of the best receivers in the league, to be honest. But again, it's that situational question mark that we don't really know about, and that's what makes him down here in the B tier. Same thing with, I don't think I added him here, so I might have to make a cut. I'll be right back. All right, we're back, everybody. I apologize for that. Basically, we're missing 2 players, actually, so I got them added into the tier maker list here. It was DJ Moore and Rashad Bateman. So we're going to talk through DJ Moore first. Obviously, we were talking about, red flags in the situation, very talented players with a lot of upside, that you just kind of have a foggy view as to how they're going to maximize that upside. I actually just recorded a video today about my top 10 redraft wide receivers, and I did a part 2 where I did my top 20, and that was today's video, so go check that out. DJ essentially is a player who had 162 targets and 28.5% of the target share in Carolina, yet was the wide receiver 23 in points per game, because he's had a rough situation and he has not produced in the red zone. His career high in receiving touchdowns is 4 TDs in a single season. And one of the things you can point to is kind of a consistent trend there. Yeah, the quarterback play has never been great. It's always been an issue, a red flag, an unfortunate circumstance. But when you've got 3 straight years of 4 TD production, we can pretty much bake that into your fantasy value. I hate saying that. I love DJ Moore. I get a lot of flack for the hate I put on him. But last year I had the same concerns, the same reasons to fade him, the same red flags, and he was great for a month, and then my concerns all came to fruition. The consistency was not there. The situation has not changed. DJ Moore is going to see a filthy target share this year, but unless Carolina has the guts to make a move, the situation, the result, I don't think will be any different. Sam Darnold held it together for a month, and yes, he got injured. Yes, he's confident that he can be a top NFL quarterback, and he went 4-0 to start the season last year. Maybe he was actually only 3-0. But after that, I mean, the situation crumbled and folded. So for me, until that area of concern changes, I have to keep him as a B tier player, but he has A tier upside. He'll never reach the S tier. But he could be that player if they make a move. Terry's the same thing. Terry McLaurin might actually be a better prospect than DJ Moore. He's a guy who has blazing speed. He's 6'3". He's a dominant number 1 receiver. He's just had garbage quarterback play from Taylor Heineke to I love you Fitzmagic, but you were not great for consistent receiver production. He had Alex Smith off the injury for a bit in 2020. And it's just been a rough ride. Kyle Allen, and I think I said Taylor Heineke already, and not to mention, rest in peace, Dwayne Haskins, who was also obviously his college teammate, and they were able to link up in the 2 players' rookie season primarily. But the quarterback play has not been ideal. It's not been a consistency in this offense. Hopefully Carson Wentz can be a step up from Taylor Heineke, but that's still not elite quarterback play. I just talked about Carson Wentz's struggles to deliver Michael Pittman deep ball success. And while we're on the topic, let's talk Michael Pittman. So the same thing here. Long-term quarterback play has not been addressed. I think that short-term, Pittman will have a great season this year because Matt Ryan is a very accurate downfield passer, because he has such upside as a vertical passing player, but the red zone production is iffy. That's a red flag. He's going to have to find ways to score over the top or after the catch, and Matt Ryan's towards the end of his career. So how long are you going to really get Matt Ryan's best levels of production in this Indianapolis offense before they have to find yet another quarterback and the vicious cycle continues for Michael Pittman? But as a 6'4", field-stretching, athletic player with great frame, great jump ball winning ability, and the opportunity to find success, he's got everything you could ask for. Chris Godwin could formerly be an 8-tier player, but again, Tom Brady just retired and then unretired. How much longer are you going to have TB12? That's a legitimate question. It could be 1, I would say upwards of 2, absolutely no more than 3 seasons for Tom. I know he doesn't like retirement. He loves football, but eventually Father Time has to win. I'm up there with the huge Brady fans. I love watching greatness, and Tom is absolutely a great player. I don't want to see him leave the NFL. I was very sad the day he retired. I made like a sad retirement video, like a thank you, Tom type thing. But at the end of the day, the day is coming, essentially, and Chris Godwin is someone who is coming off an ACL injury. I don't think that this year will be great for fantasy production, and if it is Tom's last year, then he becomes a quarterback, finding himself as a very valuable role player, as a big slot guy. Could see a lot of volume easily in that role in his offense, but there is that but always with these players in the B tier. Who's going to be that long-term quarterback solution, and how quickly can he get healthy and 100% back to being himself? The last guy on the B tier is DK Metcalf. He would have been maybe a fringe A tier player. You would have had to ask me last summer. I don't know what I would have told you, to be honest. With Russell Wilson, he's much more close to being an A tier player. But the issues that you have with A.J. Brown, and the reason that he was almost a B tier player, but I just couldn't quite do it because I think he's too dynamic after the catch. DK Metcalf also has to be insanely efficient vertically. He doesn't see a high volume on a per-game basis. He didn't even see that with Russell Wilson. And he just, again, has to make the most of the opportunities he gets. This year, if you're dealing with Drew Lock or Geno Smith, get ready for some significant consistency reduction, which has already been kind of a problem for DK. And when the Seahawks don't seem to have a valid solution or answer to that problem at this point in time, I don't think Drew Lock's the guy. I'm not buying in. You're going to have some rough years of fantasy production. So really the one way I see him succeeding is if they suck so bad that he can somehow overcome the situation and gets a higher volume output because of negative game scripts. That's still a short-term issue that you have to overcome, though. And again, I think you need a more stable situation. A very talented player, has a lot of potential. But we're not going to be ranking everyone on this list today. I just wanted to throw that out there. There are some extra names that filtered their way in from the redraft list. So we're going to be talking through our C tier and our final tier for today's video. This is a very big tier because I think that there's a heck of a lot of players that have a ton of upside. But before we get to the younger names and faces, we're going to talk about Mike Evans here, who is in store for short-term elite fantasy production, even more so than Chris Godwin, but Chris Godwin has father time on his side a little bit more. And in terms of his plug-and-play ability to be a high-volume receiver in any NFL team's offense, that's kind of where he gets the B tier versus the... Actually, this should be the C tier. I'm going to change that right now. I apologize. That's been out there for the whole video. I deleted a tier, and then it must not have, auto-changed it. Basically, though, I think Mike, this Tampa offense was number one in basically all passing metrics last season for volume, production, yardage output, red zone passing attempts, all that stuff. Mike Evans will be a primary beneficiary of that. No more AB in-house. I mean, Gio Bernard's out of the backfield for whatever that's worth for his target share. No more Rojo. You did bring in Rashad White. But basically, I'm just mentioning Gronk hasn't come back yet. Names that have vacated targets for Tampa's offense. Mike is the by far and away best red zone weapon. Goal line fade is unstoppable between him and Tom and their goal line checking ability in the pre-snap game. You've got the ability for him to see a higher volume of targets because of the lack of target competition, especially with Chris recovering from that ACL and maybe not being 100% day one. And again, short-term success should be elite for fantasy production this season. And then we get into the juicy class of 2022, but actually let's toss Bateman up there so he doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Big breakout season coming for Rashad Bateman. Hollywood Brown had 146 targets in the offense last year as the number one receiver. You can hate on the Ravens, say they run the ball too much, but the opportunity is there. Watkins is gone. Bateman is the number one with Brown out of there as well. That's really the thing that moves the needle the most for him. And Lamar Jackson will come back healthy. He is not injury prone. It was a fluke accident on a pressure from a defensive back that got him rolled up on his ankle. It was not a routine power run play. There is plenty of opportunity for volume in the passing game for this football team. They were decimated by injuries last year. Yes, there'll be more positive game scripts, so maybe his ceiling is 140 targets. But if he gets 140 targets, this is one of the most complete receivers in the league in terms of young, youthful players. He's not Devontae Adams right now, but he was my comp with Bateman coming out of Minnesota. He's not an elite athlete, but his intangibles and his skills are. He has breakout written all over him, and I would be shocked if he is not a B-tier player come this time next year, as long as the Ravens don't make some move to really divvy up the target share there. Now we'll move into... Actually, one more player. I lied. It's Jerry Jeudy. It's the Russell Wilson effect. I think Russell finished his career with the Broncos. I think it's humongous positives for him and Cortland Sutton, who doesn't make the top 24 today, but is definitely someone to keep your eye on and, keep a close eye on what I just said, because they both are very talented players and have the ability to produce. But for me, it's Jeudy that's going to see more volume, at least in my opinion. His route running ability and his savviness is fantastic. So I think that he's going to bring a lot to the offense, and I think Russell Wilson's going to bring a lot of value to the table for Jeudy as a playmaker and a valuable fantasy asset. Now we get into our 4 receivers from this year's draft class: Drake London, Jameson Williams, in no particular order, Treylon Burks, and Garrett Wilson, who I think Garrett Wilson will be one of the best receivers in the NFL. I think all 4 of these guys have the chance to be that. But for Treylon Burks, you could be A.J. Brown filling that role in Tennessee day one. He has a chance to be the rookie receiver 1 in 2022. Immediate fantasy football production. His skill set is great. He's physical. He's able to beat up on defensive players. And I think, again, he brings a lot of value and versatility. Jameson Williams, I think, is a really nice complement to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I can see a role where they both have a lot of volume. And Jameson Williams is a lot better vertically, explosively, as an athlete and a pure raw talent. Williams is a much better player than St. Brown, who I think will still be a great big slot option. But Williams is going to find a really nice role in that Detroit offense. And if they still continue to have negative game scripts, he could also have a very valuable role on that team. Drake London for Atlanta, clearly the number 1 receiver, probably the number 2 target in terms of Pitts being there and, probably being the best pass catcher on that team. But he's going to get a lot more underneath volume year 1 than people give him credit for. And he's a tough tackle. He is a big player. He's not explosive. His best chance of winning vertically is to simply jump up and moss you, kind of like Mike Evans. He's not going to blow past guys, but there is that upside there. And he has a chance to be a menace in the red zone as well. If Marcus Mariota, even in year 1, can get him enough targets down there. But I don't know if they'll be moving the ball as effectively as they need to be to get him quality, double-digit touchdown levels of production. And then the last guy here, Garrett Wilson, probably has the toughest out for year 1. Zach Wilson's really going to have to take a step forward if that's going to be the case. But Garrett Wilson is maybe one of the top 5 prospects at the receiver position in the NFL, if you ask me. Of young players, Garrett Wilson is so dang good at running routes. His athleticism, 4.39 in the 40-yard dash. Insane athletic ability. His body control after the catch, at the catch point. Everything I saw on tape to me screamed wide receiver 1 overall in the draft. Now, he's probably not in a good of, I know for a fact he's not in as good of a situation as Jamar Chase. He's probably not going to see the volume that Justin Jefferson gets, but the talent, the upside, if you want to find a player in a bad situation to bet on, it's Garrett Wilson. He's going to give you probably this year the frustrations and the struggles, the misery of a DJ Moore and a Terry McLaurin, but long-term, I could not be more excited about a player in his athletic profile and ability to translate his skills to the NFL level than I am about Garrett Wilson. So those are our top 24 wide receiver tiers. You see those extra 6 guys didn't make it, either not producing at an elite enough level at their old age stages of their career, like a Keenan Allen and A-Rob are guys I love, but their ceilings are a little bit too low to fit into a top 24 Dynasty rankings list. There's too much uncertainty with Amari Cooper. Cortland Sutton barely misses it, and so does Mike Williams. Michael Thomas, we also haven't seen played in 2 years, but those are guys that I used in my top 24 redraft rankings. But these were the top 24 Dynasty rankings. So if you guys enjoyed today's video, drop down, give today's video a like, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on so you're never late for a video. I appreciate the heck out of all you guys still watching today's episode, and I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow or whatever that might be. Don't forget, Underdog Fantasy, deposit $10 or more, and you'll get the draft guides free. They'll double your money and give you some cash, double your money to play with on their platform. And again, of course, those draft guides on sizzlefantasy.com. We'll get you guys set up with those at the end of every week for those that signed up with the code and all that great stuff. So thank you so much for you guys and all your support. As always, I said this already a few times, but please feel free to put any questions, comments, or concerns you have with your Dynasty teams, rosters, fantasy leagues, whatever it is. Comment section, community Discord, perfect places to ask those questions, and they will be answered. So thank you guys one more time. Again, appreciate the heck out of you. Peace out.